You know, most of us think we get what money is. It's the coins in our pocket, the bills in our wallet, the number on a screen. But what if I told you that's not even half the story? The real story of money is, well, it's way stranger, way more creative, and a lot more human than the version we're all taught. It's really a story about a technology that's been evolving for literally thousands of years.
So let's start with the biggest question of them all. What is money? Is it a thing? Is it just an idea? Or maybe a system? Well, the answer, as you're about to see, is kind of yes to all of that. But if you strip everything else away, at its very core, money is a technology for one single thing: trust.
You see, there are really two stories of money. On the one hand, you've got the simple story, the one you probably heard in Econ 101. It starts with barter, it moves to gold, and it ends up as cash. It's a nice, clean, logical story. But then there's the real story, the one that history and anthropology actually back up. And that one, it doesn't start with barter, it starts with debt. It's not really about gold, it's about trust. And today, it's not just about cash anymore, it's about code.
So let's start by just tearing down that simple story. Because to really understand where we're headed, you first have to realize that the foundation of what we think we know about money is, well, it's basically a myth.
Okay, so here's the classic tale. You're a baker, you've got bread, but you need shoes. So you've got to wander around town, hoping to find a shoemaker who just so happens to be hungry for your bread right at this exact moment. Economists have a fancy term for this, the double coincidence of wants, and the whole story goes that money was invented to solve this super inefficient problem. It makes perfect sense logically, but there's a big problem.
It never actually happened. I mean it. Anthropologists have been looking for decades, and they have never, ever found a society that actually ran on pure barter. What they found instead is that early communities ran on a kind of social IOU system, a community-wide ledger of favors and obligations. You'd give your neighbor bread today because you trusted they'd help you out with your roof next month. See, money didn't come from strangers trying to trade. It came from neighbors keeping track of what they owed each other.
Okay, so if money is just a system for tracking trust, then its entire history is just a series of technological upgrades to make that trust bigger, better, and more efficient. So let's follow that thread. Let's see how this whole concept evolves from the stamp of a king all the way to a line of code.
You can really break down this evolution into 4 huge revolutions. First, we put our trust in a king's authority. Then, we shifted that trust to a private institution's reputation. After that, we tried to anchor our trust in something physical, gold. And finally, we ended up where we are today, basically trusting a government's promise.
This was a massive, massive leap. Think about it. Before coins, if you wanted to trade with a chunk of silver, you had to weigh it. You had to test its purity every single time. It was a pain. But then the Lydian kings in what's now Turkey, they changed the game. They started stamping a standard coin with their official seal. And all of a sudden, you weren't just trusting the metal anymore, you were trusting the king's guarantee. It was the world's first government-backed trust protocol, and it let trade just explode.
All right, now let's fast forward about 2,000 years to Renaissance Italy. The famous Medici Bank, they had a new problem. Moving giant piles of gold across Europe was super slow and really dangerous. So what was their solution? Absolutely genius. The bill of exchange. Instead of shipping gold, they shipped a piece of paper, a trusted promise from the Medici Bank. The trust literally shifted from a physical thing to an institution's private books. This was basically the birth of international finance as we know it.
By the late 1800s, this whole system kind of hit its peak with what we call the classical gold standard. The big idea here was to create the ultimate form of trust by making the system almost automatic. Every major currency, the dollar, the pound, the franc, was pegged to a fixed weight of gold. This created a global network of totally stable and predictable exchange rates. And this slide really shows the supposed magic of how it was all supposed to work. In theory, it was this perfect, self-correcting machine. So let's say Britain buys too many goods from France. Gold flows out of Britain. That shrinks Britain's money supply, which makes their goods cheaper. And since their goods are now cheaper, their exports go up. And boof, the trade balance automatically fixes itself. It was a beautiful, elegant, clockwork theory. But that same rigidity would turn out to be its greatest weakness.
And that entire world, that whole clockwork system, it ended with this one sentence. In 1971, President Nixon got on TV and just unilaterally cut the last tie between the US dollar and gold. And in that single moment, the entire era of money backed by a physical thing was over.
And that decision threw us into the age of fiat money.
The word fiat actually comes from Latin. It means let it be done. It means our money has value simply because the government says it does, and because we all collectively agree to trust that promise. So for the first time in history, the whole global financial system was floating on nothing more than a shared belief, with no physical anchor at all.
So, what happens when these different systems of trust get pushed to their absolute breaking point? Well, let's look at two of the biggest financial crises in modern history, because they teach us two totally different but equally important lessons about trust.
This table just lays it out so clearly. The Great Depression was a failure of a rigid public system, the gold standard. But the 2008 crisis, that was a failure of a hidden, opaque, private system, the world of shadow banking. You see, one system was too strict to allow a rescue, and the other was too murky to even see the risks until it was way too late.
So here's the crazy thing about the Depression. The gold standard became what economists now call golden fetters. To keep the dollar pegged to gold, the Federal Reserve was forced to do the exact opposite of what a crashing economy needed. They had to raise interest rates to stop gold from leaving the country, which just completely choked off credit and made the Depression catastrophically worse. Now, 2008 was the mirror image of that. All this crazy financial innovation, like chopping up and repackaging subprime mortgages, it created a massive shadow banking system that nobody truly understood. All the risk was hidden away, off the books, just quietly building up until the whole thing came crashing down. The system wasn't too rigid, it was way too flexible and unregulated, and it got so big that it absolutely required a massive public bailout to stop a complete global meltdown.
And that brings us right up to today. You know, the failures of both the super rigid gold system and the kind of opaque fiat system have sparked a whole new revolution, an attempt to build a financial system where our trust isn't in kings or in banks, but in pure mathematics and code.
Yeah, Bitcoin. It was created right in the ashes of the 2008 crisis, and it's a direct shot at the flaws of the fiat system. Its central idea is to take human decision-making out of the equation entirely. With its unchangeable supply cap of 21 million coins, it's trying to digitally recreate what made gold so special, a system of trust based on pure, predictable, programmable scarcity.
And then there's decentralized finance, or DeFi, which takes that whole idea and just cranks it up to 11. If Bitcoin is trying to replace government money, DeFi is trying to replace the entire banking system. The goal here is to rebuild everything, lending, borrowing, trading, you name it, using bits of self-executing code called smart contracts, getting rid of the need for trusted middlemen like the Medici Bank altogether. And this table just nails the paradigm shift. Traditional finance, or TradFi, is built on trusting institutions and laws. DeFi proposes a pretty radical alternative. Trust the code. We're talking about a shift from a permission system where you need ID to a permissionless one that's open to anyone. But that also means you're swapping out old risks for brand new ones.
Because let's be real, trusting in code is not a silver bullet. I mean, what happens when that code has a bug? On an unchangeable blockchain, that could mean a catastrophic, irreversible theft. What happens when the system needs outside data and that data gets corrupted? And what about this whole decentralization illusion, where you find out that power just ends up concentrating in the hands of a few developers anyway?
So here's the real takeaway here. DeFi isn't some magic escape from the laws of financial gravity. It's an incredible piece of technology for sure, but what it's really doing is replaying centuries of financial history at warp speed. It's rediscovering, often the hard way, all those old dangers, leverage, bank runs, panics, that made us regulate the traditional system in the first place.
Which leaves us with the one ultimate conclusion. The story of money is the story of our search for a better way to trust each other. That's it. From a king's stamp, to a banker's ledger, to a government's promise, and now to a line of code. The technology is always changing, but that fundamental challenge is always the same. The entire system is and always will be built on trust. The only real question is, what or who are we going to choose to trust next?